Arrington. He was raised in Plainview, Texas, son of a tractor salesman and school teacher. Joel graduated from Texas Tech, and his passion for public service took him to Austin, Texas, where he worked for Governor George Bush.
We don't have to go through everything my mom said about me. This was just tell me you're a freedom-loving fellow West Texan, son of a tractor salesman.
He said
I've
it.
been called son of a lot of things.
He said it, and we've got a true conservative here, and we appreciate him showing up here. Steve Friskup, everybody from Cowboy Fellowship Church for letting us be here. We really appreciate that, and we know that we have some true Texans here that are representing this region very well. So,
Sheriff, thank you, and I hate to interrupt you, but I know I one of these days I'm going to get an abridged version of that, and it gets embarrassing, and then people find out, eventually they come to the conclusion that my mama wrote that, and then it just, we get sidetracked. But Sheriff, thank you for hosting us, and thank you all, everybody in law enforcement, for what you do to keep us safe, and my sheriff here, Kelly Rowe, and for protecting and serving our communities. And man, what a upside down world we found ourselves living in just a short period of time. I'm just as surprised as you are. You sent me to Washington to be your voice and to fight for the future of our country and for the values that we hold dear here in West Texas, the values that you grew up with and that I grew up with. And there are days that I hardly recognize our great country. Now, I'm going to believe that a lot of that is mainstream media giving more time and attention to the loudest and squeakiest wheels and not to the vast majority of Americans. I just do not believe that Americans, my fellow citizens and your citizens of the great United States of America, believe that you guys are the bad guys, and the bad guys are the good guys. I can't remember the scripture verse, but Steve, where are you, Steve? What's the scripture? Where does it come from where they said, and they called evil good and good evil? And
that's in Romans 1.
It's just this sort of description of the changing character of a country, of a community, where things are upside down. And I recognize that every profession has its bad actors. And I probably, other than, I'd put pastors up there, I'd put leaders of our country, but I'd certainly have law enforcement up there. We ought to have the highest standards of professionalism and accountability, because you all have tremendous power over the citizens. And it's for good. And there ought to be checks and balances, but at the end of the day, it is a tremendous power. And with that power comes great responsibility. And I know that you all treat it as such. And I know that nobody gets hurt more by the bad cop than all the good guys. And it just, all the attention for that small minority of people in your profession can taint the entire group. And then you get the mainstream media and the left, and they just run with it and beat you with it every day, day in and day out. Then you wake up one day and the culture is completely changed. And kids don't look up to you and look to you as the safeguard, what do they call the guardian angels of our neighborhoods. And I don't want that to happen. And the only way it's not going to happen is if people in leadership speak up for the truth And the truth is, you guys are honorable men and women. You are courageous and you risk your lives. And if we want to know what life's like without law enforcement, well, there's an experiment in Portland, Oregon right now, and other places around the country that decided that they would defund their police departments. In Portland, it was $16 million worth, about 80 law enforcement officers that were taken off the beat. The folks that are hurt worse from those foolish decisions are the most vulnerable people living in the most poverty and crime-stricken neighborhoods. That's the irony. But homicides are now up this year in 2021 by over 500%. But you look across at violent crime, you look at shootings, look at the homicide rates, and almost every major city, they are up at alarming rates. And I'm not surprised, because it's upside down to think that we can disempower, disparage, and hamstring our law enforcement and reduce their budget and their force and expect any different than those statistics. I'm embarrassed to watch my fellow Americans across the country, leaders of these cities, so-called leaders, completely lay down on the job and let the mob run roughshod over their citizens and trample their constitutional rights and shoot Roman candles in the faces of our law enforcement and throw bricks at them, assault them. So my main thing to be with you today is, number one, tell you that we love you and we appreciate you and we thank God that you're willing to put that uniform on and risk your lives for our families. Secondly, with the combination of Christ for defunding the police and a border that's wide open, I've never seen anything like it, Kelly. I've just never seen. I've been down there twice now. I was there a week ago, and I was there twice recently. And when I first got elected, I went down there. It is. We thought there were problems before. It is a disaster. It is an epic crisis on the humanitarian front, and these poor people that are you talk about being taken advantage of and assaulted. The drug cartels are in complete control. Our federal government has abdicated its first job to protect, to provide for a common defense, and quite frankly, our commander-in-chief is not faithfully executing the laws of the land. So where does that put us? I've been saying, I introduced a resolution that basically is just the Constitution, just summarized. Article 4, Section 4, and Article 1, Section 10, along with providing for a common defense and executing the laws of the land, basically say, states, you weren't created by the federal government. It was the other way around. And you can exercise your sovereign powers to defend your citizens and your border when the federal government fails to do so. And that's where we are. I know the governor's doing some things along with the DPS, and I thank God for our troopers that are stepping up to fill the gap and work alongside of our federal law enforcement folks who've totally been taken out of the equation, not by their choice, but either by policies from this administration, or they're providing social services and they're not able to focus on their security mission. Now we've got more fentanyl seized this year than we had all last year, and enough to kill every American 4 times over. You know all the stats. You know about the crime. I mean, 3,600% increase in sex offenders crossing the Del Rio sector. You're telling me this isn't a crisis? You're telling me that there's no cause and effect? So my resolution basically just affirms it doesn't create any new law because we don't need it. The Constitution's clear. Texans have to step up and do right by our citizens. We welcome We welcome the law-abiding, freedom-loving people who want a better life for their families. I know I do. But they've got to respect our laws, our sovereignty, and our citizen safety. And there is nothing good about what's happening at the border. So people ask often, is it affecting your community? Are these drugs and gang members and criminals, are they showing up in West Texas and the South Plains? I've had meetings with my law enforcement many times, and just about every time I get out in the district, I make a point to spend some time with you. But I haven't talked to you since the beginning of this year on this issue. Remember, we had that meeting in Lubbock where we basically called on President Trump to declare a national emergency and send in the military to support our Border Patrol agents, our ICE agents, etc. Boy, have we come a long way since then. Basically, everything's been turned around, reversed, and unraveled. And I feel terrible for the folks at the federal level. When I'm down there, you just can see it in their faces if they're demoralized. And our fellow countrymen are really scared, and they feel abandoned by their federal government. Not by you all. Now, you got a job to keep the neighborhood safe in the highways and byways of my district, and in the communities of Muleshoe and all the other towns that you represent. And yet, you now have to deal with the fallout from this open border. So, really the topic, and we can talk about anything you want, and I'm here to listen to you. At this point, I just want you to share your experiences. I know we've got federal agents here. I know we've got our chiefs of police. Thank you for coming, and our sheriffs, our highway patrolmen. Where are we since we last met? I know where Portland is, and it ain't where Muleshoe is. We're a long way from Portland, but it all affects the entire society. You see things, you hear things, and all of a sudden your children are asking questions. Are these the good guys? So when it comes to regulating police and law enforcement, I am completely opposed to the federal government taking over that role. That is a state and local, just like education. They need to stay out of that. Now, what they can do is have a database of the bad guys, and when they have problems, they ought to get rid of them, but they've been showing up because I think some of the police unions protect them, and they end up recirculating in some department, in some town, in another state. Now that's bad too. That's horrible. So let's get rid of the bad guys. And if we need a federal database because it covers all 50 states, and there's that sort of interstate commerce principle, I'm for that. Banning chokeholds, I think they ought to be used in extenuating circumstances, but I think when your lives are at risk, or others, I think when trained, you can responsibly do it. And I remember a conference call with a lot of you, and I asked, how many years have you guys been serving in a law enforcement role? Many were 20, 30 plus years. I asked how many of you guys have experienced somebody dying from the chokehold that you had to deploy. Not a single person said anybody. No knock warrants. Another thing I'm concerned about, again, for your safety and to be able to catch the bad guys. But I want your perspective on it. Qualified immunity. If you don't get qualified immunity, we can kiss this thing goodbye. I'd call you a fool to try to do the job you love and risk losing everything because you didn't have the legal protection to do it. Now, I'll go back to the beginning. Citizens have constitutional God-given rights, and you all have a lot of power. And I'm all for accountability, transparency, responsibility, high bar, all of it. And getting serious about the bad guys who are in your profession and not ever letting them put on a uniform again, because they're hurting you. They're hurting our fellow Americans, but they're hurting your profession. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? Let's start with just the border and move to the sort of police regulation and discussions about what the state and what the feds are talking about doing to fix it. Anytime the federal government says, I got a solution, I get nervous, Kelly. But what's going on? With the borders, it's showing up. I mean, is it showing up in your communities? I know it has in the past, but are you seeing the meth? I remember talking about drugs and just overwhelming. I don't think the American people realize virtually 100% of the meth and the heroin and the fentanyl is coming across our southern border. And now it's exponential. And before, we were still losing tens of thousands of Americans to drug addiction. I understand there's a demand side and a supply side. We got a job to do, and we're not doing it. I'm speaking as, from the federal side. Thoughts, comments? I'll shut up now and let you guys talk.
Well, you certainly hit the peg,
Can I get you to use it? I don't know if we have another microphone or not.
Well, I think you certainly hit it on the head when you talk about how does this impact us. The question we've got, especially with the governor's prospect of Operation Lone Star. If we go back to my county judge, and first question is, because everybody's thinking just strictly on the illegal immigration side, is, well, are we getting affected by that up in this part of the state? I told him, I said, well, we're going to certainly see those things, but the issue is, I think most everybody in this room is facing, you've already kind of touched on it, is just simply the fact of all the violence and everything else that comes with the competition, given the volume of traffic narcotics that are coming in. And when that border's open, we all saw it in 2014, towards the end of the Obama administration, when he had the borders wide open, and we went from seeing ounces here, ounces there, to kilos, pounds, everywhere we went. Stuff you talked about that we visited with in the past. But that's where it comes. Lubbock, Chief, am I correct? Last year, a 34-year record was broken on homicides. All game land. We can't keep enough people working to try to tamp that stuff down, which is coming back to the narcotics trade. And so when you talk about the border, it's both of those issues. There is the immigration side, which we realize that's got laws that need to be reformed, but the trafficking and the violence that's hitting our communities is coming just as a direct result of the volume of that stuff that they're pushing through to us.
Thanks, Kevin. Being in Hockley County, I'm attached to the western hip of Lubbock, and the tag operation is working in Lubbock. And again, when the narcotics trafficking is coming through, they're hitting it heavy. Increases in homicides. Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, we have 4 people in jail right now for murder. 3 of those are capital offenses, unrelated. But we have increases in violent crime. Typically speaking, my jail populations, Doc, we were talking earlier about your jail population. We are seeing more crimes of violence. Typically it was narcotic offenses, manufacture, delivery, possession offenses were, typically speaking, and related, were the higher of the offenses. Now we're seeing more aggravated assaults, sexual abuse, robberies, strong arm robberies, shootings. We're seeing more of those. I'm standing underneath something. And our jail populations are staying longer. We're getting overcrowded. Our jail population is up 30% compared to the same time last year. Our arrests are going up. Violent crime is up in our areas. And I think you can make a direct correlation, maybe not necessarily causation, you can make a correlation to increasing traffic at the border, more drugs are coming across, more competition. I mean, guys, tell me if I'm wrong, you seeing the same things, right?
Oh man, Doc.
So in a small rural county, and with the federal government failing to secure the border and DPS having to be deployed there, in small rural counties, what we rely on a lot for backup is our troopers. Yep. Well, we don't have any. All right. I mean, we've got in Region 5, I believe that there's 4 counties or 5 counties in Region 5 over there in Region 5C. You remember over there in Haskell?
Oh shoot! Region 5 has 71 counties.
But around Haskell, they're responsible for like 4 or 5 counties.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and there's 6 troopers that are assigned in that area, but most of them are either at the Capitol or at the border. So we have 1 trooper covering 5 counties, or if it's a fatality crash or major crash or anything. And I only have in my county 2 full-time and 1 part-time. That's it. So we rely on Parks and Wildlife, and then they were deployed as well. So we rely on Parks and Wildlife. We rely on DPS, and I'm sure like Ed, he's the county south. There's been times that you've been by yourself in the whole county, just like I have. We're covering the whole county. I've got 915 square miles to cover, all right? If I go up in the northwest part of my county, and there's a call in the southeast, it's an hour and 20 minutes before I get there, no matter how fast I drive. So with the deployment of the troopers to the south and the Parks and Wildlife to the south, with the federal government failing to do their job under the Constitution, we're not only is DPS being strained, but also the rural counties are being strained because we don't have any. I mean, we're going to calls. They said the violent calls. We're going to calls. No backup. Nobody there. Closest backup 40, 50 miles away. All right. So it put our lives more in danger. And the thing is that our jails are going up. Our violent crimes are going up. Trafficking. I've got a guy in jail right now that he's a Tango Blast member from Corpus Christi, caught in our county. You know, fleeing me. He had 58 grams of meth on him, delivering it to another town. Well, I mean, we don't see that very often. But the amount of traffic that's going up as far as narcotics, human smuggling, and things like that are just like I said, exponential, because it's not just staying on the border. It's traveling throughout the whole United States, and that just stems exclusively from the failure of the federal government to do their job.
Thank you, Sheriff. Is this a consistent theme and sort of outcome from what we're seeing in terms of the border crisis, in terms of the flow of these narcotics and the criminal elements, including the gangs? Y'all are seeing the same things. Yeah, 100%. I already told you what my position is, which is if the federal government doesn't perform its constitutional obligation, Article 4, Section 4 says that the federal government shall provide for a Republican form of government and protect each state from an invasion. Now I want you to hear me out on this. The invasion isn't Guatemala or Honduras. The invasion is being basically enabled by two key contributing factors. One, the failure of our federal government to live up to its obligation and responsibility, and a chief executive and commander-in-chief who's failing to execute the laws of the land faithfully. The other is the paramilitary, narco-terrorist network of cartels. To me, that's what puts this at an invasion level, at a level of states. They call it it's basically a war declaration sort of provision of the Constitution. What is it if it's not an invasion when you have the military force, the organization, the sophistication of cartels that Mexico can't even do anything about, and then our federal government's doing nothing about, and our people, the citizens of the United States, and especially those in border states, are suffering. Quite frankly, so are the people that are making the dangerous trek and being abused. 1 out of every 3 women are sexually assaulted. I mean, that to me is as clear as it can. And then Article 1, Section 10 says when that hasn't happened, i.e. the federal government failed to guarantee, and there's imminent danger, state's got to do something. Where are y'all on that? And I don't want to put you in a bind, especially you, since you've got, the governor's ratcheting this up. People ask me all the time, what can Texas do? Why can't Texas take control of the situation and put our fate in our own hands and not wait on the federal government? Because I don't see their policies changing. First of all, I don't think Vice President Harris believes in a secure border. And I'm only using her words. She raised her hand and said we should decriminalize border crossing. She raised her hand and said we ought to give free health care to people who cross the border. She compared ICE agents and the enforcement of immigration laws as a reign of terror. She's a leftist, and she's an open border advocate, maybe the chief open border advocate from the Senate. I just don't see her changing her beliefs. It's a belief. It's an ideology. And I think President Biden is not going to change, not because he's truly a leftist, but because he's scared of the left. And so he's going to let them continue. He's going to placate the left, which the bottom line is the left's in charge. So if nothing is going to happen anytime soon at the federal level, what should we do? What is your advice? I mean, we're seeing some arrest of criminals, about 1,500 according to, I was there for the roundtable with President Trump and Governor Abbott and the head of DPS. And I thought, well, 1,500 arrests, well, that's better than no arrest. But we have 180,000 people that just came last month. We got 1 million people that have come today. It's like catching water from a waterfall with a bucket. I mean, I'm all for a wall. I think physical barriers are part of a comprehensive strategy to secure the border. But $250 million, that's multiple billions of dollar project. So you got to have boots on the ground. You know, so what is the answer? And when we say Texas needs to step up, fill the gap, carry the mantle of safety and security for our citizens, what do you think that means to you? And what should I be continuing to push or not from the federal level? Yes, sir.
Well, Jodey, first of all, thank you for meeting with us all here today. And I don't want to sound like an insensitive, you know what? Yeah. But the incentives for people to come here on the state level and at the federal level, those need to be removed. And that money needs to be reallocated to the citizens of the state of Texas and to the citizens of the United States. I have people in my county that can't afford to feed their families, and we're giving free stuff to any Joe Blow that shows up at the river crossing. So, reallocation of funding, remove incentives. You know, the state offers incentives, the feds offer incentives. We need to get rid of all that and put it back to our citizens.
Well, thank you, Sheriff. And when I was at one of the processing facilities, it was really a detention, but for youth. They were mainly 17-year-old boys. And I asked the cost of providing education, 3 meals, 2 snacks, health care, lawyer, counselor. They said $1,000 a day. I said, you know how many Americans in communities across our country are getting $1,000 a day treatment? I agree with you. Incentives drive behavior. And if you tell folks that if you cross our border, you're going to be held accountable by being detained, you'll have a day in court, and or you'll be deported if you're not here with legitimate claims. Well, that's just not happening. There's not even a notice to appear in the court. They're caught and released with no notice to appear in court. The stay in Mexico policy worked on a number of fronts. First, we kept folks who were seeking asylum, which is a big loophole that people use to come here. And most of the people never showed up to their hearing because once they learned they weren't going to stay in this country, right? And the incentive was not there, they didn't come. And that's why you saw the numbers drop 70+%. But what I'm telling you is, and I agree, I think there are other incentives. And I think the immigration system's broken and it needs to be fixed in areas of we have a labor shortage and there's a win-win opportunity. And I live in ag country. And I don't fault anybody for wanting to make a better life for their family, as long as we know who's here, to play by the rules, all of that. But people who hire folks who are not here legally and go through the process, that's another big perverse incentive for bringing people here. Talk to school administrators. Ask them how easily it is to teach their students today. Ask healthcare administrators in these rural hospitals and hospitals along the border. So I agree with you, and it does sound insensitive. That's why I'm always careful to say we welcome law-abiding, freedom-loving people who want to make America their home, but there's a process. You don't just let anybody in your department. If I stuck somebody in your department, I said, you got to deal with this person's got to be part of your crew, part of your team, part of your department, and there's nothing you can do about it, you'd say you're crazy. I got to test their competency. I got to test that they meet the cultural values of my associate. You wouldn't just let anybody in your organization. Why would we do that in our country? But I get back to the point that I can say this to these four walls, and I can preach to the choir, but I don't see the current president and his border czar, quote unquote, making any changes. In fact, they're talking about repealing Title 42, which was a major and very effective provision during a pandemic to say, we're in a public health crisis, we're turning everybody around. They're talking about repealing that. So my question is, what can Texas do? Make you answer that question for the citizens of this district who ask me, why do we have to wait on the federal government? Why can't we defend ourselves? What's the answer, Doc?
Well, under Title 32 of the United States Code and Article 4 of the Texas Constitution, that is the power to form a military as far as the National Guard's under Title 32 and Article 4 is the Texas Guard. And one way to combat that is on the federal level is get the cartels declared as actual terrorist organizations, and then the rules of engagement change. They're no longer seen as criminals. More funding goes to combat them under terrorist organizations, and then once they're declared a terrorist organization, the military has authorization to deal with them. That would be one thing to help combat them, to get them actually declared a terrorist organization. And it can be done through the House and the Senate, and it doesn't matter if there's an executive order to override it, because it doesn't matter, because the laws are made and the declarations are made within the legislative branch. But under Title 32 of the United States Code and then Article 4 of the Texas Constitution, the governor has the power to summon and declare a military to defend from invasion. Not just to back up the other people, but defend from invasion, an actual military that can be stationed on the border. Not with hammers and not with shaking fingers, firearms, tanks, everything. He has that right. We have Texas Air Force, we have the Texas Guard, we have a right to summon people under the governor's call. That's one thing. But getting them declared a terrorist organization would help at the federal level, because then funds from terrorists on that could be used to combat them.
Well, not only funds, but you can. It's the same thing we did with the drug cartels in Colombia. It just changes.
Change the narrative.
It changes the narrative, and it also gives us more authority and flexibility. But I go back, Doc, to this point. Yes, I agree with you. In fact, I've signed Chip Roy's legislation that would declare them as such. And in my resolution, we also sort of redeclare them as narco-terrorists, the cartels. That's what I'm saying. The invasion isn't Guatemalans. It is aided and abetted by our federal government and current leadership, and those who are in total control of the border. See, when somebody crosses that border, they're paying a fee to somebody. You don't just come across the border. Somebody's getting paid. What about the folks who can't pay? And then they get a plane ticket from our government to fly anywhere in the United States. I asked, I said, can they go to Hawaii? Can they just pick? And, yeah, don't do any background checks. You should read the stories of some of these folks who are abused once somebody stakes claim to being their guardian. There's no follow-up. There's no vetting. That's a whole separate issue. But they're pushed throughout the entire country. What percentage of these folks have to pay back the cartels because they couldn't pay the freight on the way here by being part of the network of pushing the criminal activity? I don't know, but I know that's going to last for years. Now again, if that's not invasion, I don't know what is. But I get back to it, Doc. I'd vote for that. We're not going to get that out of Congress. We can't, we can't, yeah, exactly. But I mean, we can't get an infrastructure bill. We're darn sure not going to get that. What can Texas do? What do you perceive that Texas can do? I mean, my resolution and the way I see the world according or through the lens of the Constitution. And I appreciate you citing the Texas Constitution. But my understanding is that this becomes a state sovereign power issue. And right now, maybe we're arresting 1,500 criminals, and we busted 40 stash houses. We've got hundreds of thousands of folks. At some point, when do you start enforcing the immigration laws on the books? You're supposed to be detained when you cross the southern border. If you don't have legitimate reasons, you're supposed to be deported. There are lots of things that you can do to exercise that sovereign power and that inherent right of self-defense. I'm seeing some of it being done, but I think there's a whole lot more we can do. And I don't know when it becomes a big enough crisis that we do it. But I defer to the state leadership on this. But when people ask me, I say border states have the sovereign right. They can call on their military, this Texas National Guard. They can utilize their law enforcement. They can enforce the law. They can prosecute the bad guys. They can repatriate and deport the folks who shouldn't be here. I don't know. I'm just telling you, if you're looking at Washington to solve it, or you're looking to this administration, we're going to be back here a year from now talking about the damage done and untold lives that have been forever changed. And y'all are also part of the indirect cost, because you don't have the backup, because your jails are full, and because you got more criminal elements infesting your neighborhoods and communities and families. There's just a lot to be said on the subject. I'm happy to take any other comments or questions. I'm really here to listen to you, but and then I want to change the topic just a little bit, and then we'll get out of your hair and let you get back to protecting and serving. I mean, do y'all agree with what I'm saying, or am I off? Am I off base?
I agree.
I mean, I'm not taking, but I mean, raise your hand and just, if you think I'm speaking the truth, and if you agree with what I'm saying and the path that I'm going, raise your hand. So I know that I've got, okay. All right, well, we're going to continue to press this. And
Congressman,
yes,
just one quick question back to you.
Yeah.
You're asking the question, but
Yeah.
how well briefed were you on Governor Abbott's Operation Lone Star plan in Edinburgh?
Well, we got a good briefing from the, I don't know if it's captain that is but the head of the DPS went through a PowerPoint of a lot of the statistics that were startling, just when you thought you couldn't be surprised by the volume of criminal activity. I think I learned some things. I don't think they got into a lot of detail as to Project Lone Star. My takeaway is we have done a lot of good, especially our highway patrolmen, DPS officers. But coming alongside of the federal law enforcement personnel in support of them. But if they are defunct because they have been sort of disemboweled in their ability to enforce the law and secure the border, then what do you're just handing somebody over to a group that is, first of all, overwhelmed with processing children and families, and secondly, they've been neutered by the federal government and by this administration. Really, it's this administration. So I kind of saw it as Texans stepping up to help their fellow federal law enforcement officers provide a presence. I rode on the boat up and down the river with DPS agents. What do you do when you get somebody? I mean, you hand it over to folks that are under the direction of catch and release and all the other stuff. So I saw it as circular to me. I didn't see it. I saw it as wanting to properly coordinate and support the federal side, but I saw it as feckless and, you know, and futile, because it seemed that once they got into the federal system, it was back to everything we just talked about. And I thought, my gosh, we're spending $1 billion on that? And we're causing these guys to have no backup, and they're now overrunning their communities. Now, that's not your problem. You're going to salute and try, and I commend the governor and all of you for trying to help. I just wonder at some point when we're going to exercise the authority to detain, to deport, and to prosecute in lieu of the federal government not doing it. That's really my...
And that's the second part of that. That's why I was asking. I wasn't sure if how well briefed you've been on what they're talking about there.
So are they talking about doing that next step?
They've got a call out. I've been back and forth with the governor's office as recent as yesterday. They've made a call for jailers. They have opened up and emptied some prison units. They've given direction to the troopers primarily to, granted because we don't have that immigration authority, to file for criminal trespass. They've got an intake center down in Del Rio, Valverde County. We're looking to try to get staffed as soon as we can get some logistical details figured out. I'll be on more phone calls and Zooms the rest of this week, but just, you kept asking the question, that's at least one step that's going.
Yep.
But to everybody's point, your point you've echoed it a number of times is we're robbing Peter to pay Paul to fill a gap or try to fill a gap. But the governor was very clear in Del Rio. The thing that resonated with me there was if we can at least create a environment that makes Texas unwelcome to cross over, push the problem to New Mexico, Arizona, and California, at least we're doing something to protect the great state of Texas and discouraging that activity here until changes happen or we get back into a position of control. We can apply everything we've talked about in here today and get some practical applications and some practical enforcement back on this.
Yeah, and I think that it's a responsible ratcheting up of that responsibility being borne on Texas leaders and law enforcement. You mentioned like we can only charge for trespassing because we're not enforcing immigration laws. I guess my point is at what time do we say, is it we had 160 countries now, 160 countries represent 40% of the 180,000 people who came across the border last month, 40% came from countries other than the Northern Triangle of Mexico. Do we wait till we have a terrorist attack? Do we wait till somebody's children are killed? That's my question is, are we going to be able to do enough if we keep tiptoeing around the federal jurisdiction and our jurisdiction? I mean, my understanding, Doc, is when that invasion is happening and your federal government has failed, you step in with the force and effect of the law, period. I just don't want to be back here a year from now saying, man, we had some things that sounded good and were symbolically comforting, but did they achieve the outcomes? 1,500 bad guys in jail, that's a start. But we have 180,000 in 1 month that are crossing now. I'm not saying that they're all criminals, but I don't want to be pushing a rock up the hill and then one day decide, okay, we're going to go all in on this. It's a healthy conversation. I don't know that I have the answer. I think the governor seems to be moving in the right direction, responsibly ratcheting it up as required. Okay, I think they're trying to wave me out of here, but I don't think I have to ask you anything about the federal role in regulating law enforcement. I think I saw enough head shaking saying, don't do that. I would have loved to have heard, and I don't know, I guess we don't have time, but we talked about this when the bills first came out and passed the House. But what I'd love to hear from you about is the whole idea of the chokeholds, qualified immunity, and the no-knock warrants. Let me just simply say this. Raise your hand if you think the no-knock warrant is an important tool for you to do your job and keep us safe. And it's an appropriate tool when trained and used. Okay. I'd say the vast majority. Raise your hand if you think the chokehold is a necessary procedure, if you will, in extenuating circumstances, and you must be trained. I'm not saying just flippantly, but is there appropriate use and time to use a chokehold? Raise your hand if you think that's for your safety and the safety of those around. Okay, vast majority. Do you think qualified immunity is essential to recruiting the best and brightest into your profession to protect our families? Raise your hand if you think. Okay, I don't think I saw it, and I could ask the other way, but I won't do it. But I mean, this is so you know that the federal, even the most moderate, even the bipartisan legislative solution is to go after these things. So you already have the narrative in the mainstream media. You've already got local knuckleheads calling for defunding the police in Austin and Seattle and Atlanta and all over the country. And then on top of that, they want to take away qualified immunity and some of these tools. Is it me, or would that be a new disaster? We got one at the border. Would that be a disaster in law and order and domestic tranquility and the profession of law enforcement? Raise your hand if you agree with that. I mean, honestly. Okay. Just want to make sure, because, man, I'm out there, and we're fighting, and we're very vocal, and I'm going to continue to be. I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. We love you, our citizens in West Texas. You know they got your back, and you know I do too. And we're going to continue to fight against that nonsense, and where we can make changes that are appropriate, to hold those accountable that make it hard on everybody because they're not ethical, because they do bad things to their citizens and they abuse the badge. When you have suggestions on that, we got to bring suggestions. My belief is Minnesota, Minneapolis, where it was ground zero with George Floyd, that they should handle if they've got a bad actor in their department, they got to get rid of them. Now that's been solved by the judicial system, by the justice system. Justice ran its course. He's locked up for 22 plus years. Okay? Minneapolis and Muleshoe and other local departments and the sheriff's departments in counties like Lubbock and all throughout in Bailey County, y'all are held accountable to your citizens. You're an elected leader. The police chiefs, the city councils and mayors, they're accountable. So when something gets sideways because somebody isn't holding somebody accountable in Minneapolis, I don't want the solution to regulate the entire law enforcement profession from Washington. Are we on the same page? Okay. Keep coming with your ideas. Keep coming with your solutions for how we can fix the broken pieces, but also maintain the integrity of our federalism and of your profession, and make sure that you guys are still empowered and safe to do your jobs to protect and serve. God bless y'all. It's so good to see you, every one of you. Thank you. Y'all are always, whenever we do this, you're always coming out, and you're always engaging, and you're always so encouraging to me. Selfishly, I just need to be back here with you all a little bit so I can get renewed in my spirit to go back and fight the fight on your behalf. Thank you, Sheriff. My sheriff over there, ladies and gentlemen. He'd like to arrest me on occasion just to show me he's really the top of the food chain on political leadership in Lubbock County. God bless you guys. Go West Texas. Oh, we're going to get my favorite cowboy pastor to pray us out. He said he prayed on the way in, and I missed it, and I don't want to miss a prayer meeting. So would you pray that God gives us wisdom?
Come on, I'm going to put my hands on this guy. Lord, we thank you right now for this great United States of America, one nation under you, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Lord, every person in this building today is committed to serving you and serving their fellow man and serving what this country stands for. I pray your angels of protection over every law enforcement officer in the sound of my voice and those who aren't here. But that God, you watch over us and keep us under your wing that we might dwell under the shadow of the Almighty. That Lord, that your anointing and your hand be on Jodey Arrington as he represents us in this representative republic. And so God, bless him and use him as he fights against the forces of evil, as well as all these men and women in this room. So Lord, we give you glory. I pray that your church will rise up out of the muck and have a voice for you that stands alongside all those engaged, all those involved, and that God, we'd all operate in courage and fearlessness with original intent, and intent for the next batch that's coming our way. And we love you, Lord, and we love our country, and we love each other, and we bless you now. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.